The maid in grey came hurtling down the gravel drive of Ravensmere Hall at a dead run, her apron strings flying loose behind her and a tin trunk banging against her hip, and she would have gone straight through Charlotte Merritt if Charlotte had not stepped cleanly sideways and caught the girl's elbow to steady her.
"Let me go,"
the girl gasped, wrenching her arm free.
"Let me go, miss. Please, before he rings that bell again."
Charlotte said nothing. She had travelled for 2 days on 3 different coaches, and the hem of her grey-blue travelling cloak was heavy with wet road, and her pale gold hair was pinned tight under a bonnet that had been new 6 years ago, and was not new now. She pressed a shilling into the girl's palm out of habit, because her mother had always said a woman running without coin was a woman running into worse trouble. The girl took it, stared, and then was gone around the bend of the yew hedge without another word. On the steps of the great house, a woman in black bombazine watched the runaway with an expression Charlotte recognized at once, the weary patience of a housekeeper who had given up counting. Her iron-grey hair was pulled into a knot so tight it pulled at her temples, and her hands were folded over her apron with the stillness of long discipline. "The 100th," the woman said as Charlotte came up. Her voice was dry as a scraped hearth. "You would be Miss Merritt from the agency. I am Mrs. Halvard, the housekeeper. You picked a poor morning to arrive." 100 maids in 6 months, Charlotte said. 98, if you care for an honest figure. The agency exaggerates in its own direction when it sends a new one. 2 were asked to leave for theft. The rest ran. That girl there, that was Betsy, lasted 11 hours. His Grace threw an inkwell at her on account of she laid the fire in the wrong grate. Charlotte let her eyes climb the front of Ravensmere. It was a great grey pile of a house, 4 stories and a weathered gable, the mullioned windows set deep in stone that had seen 4 generations of Ashworths, and was in no particular hurry to see a 5th. Rooks spoke to each other in the elm by the drive. Somewhere inside a door slammed, and then another, and then a silence descended that had the quality of a held breath. "Where is His Grace now?" Charlotte asked. Mrs. Halvard looked at her properly for the first time. She was a woman who had been paid to assess girls for 27 years, and what she saw in Charlotte did not fit her usual registers. Charlotte was tall, slender without being reedy, and her pale gold hair under the bonnet was the colour of ripe wheat in June light. Her eyes were a clear, very level grey. She was not pretty in the way that made kitchen boys drop saucepans. She was the other thing. The thing that made a man stop speaking mid-sentence, because something in her face had told him to. "The locked wing," Mrs. Halvard said slowly. "The old morning room. He has sat in it since Christmas. He will not let any of us pass the threshold. Not I, not Davis the groom, not Dr. Broughton, who comes out from the village and is turned back at the study door each time." "Thank you," said Charlotte, and she walked past the housekeeper into the house. "Miss Merritt, I shall want hot water sent up in half an hour," Charlotte called over her shoulder. "And call for the morning room grate, which I expect has been called a long time. If His Grace rings, ignore him. I shall answer him myself." She went through the great hall, with its draped furniture and silent clocks, and into the west corridor, where a blue carpet ran along the boards like an aisle, and ended in a door of dark oak. On the door was a brass plate that read simply, "The Duke's Rooms." She lifted her hand. She did not knock. She turned the handle and walked in. The morning room of the Duke of Ravensmere was exactly the wrong size for the man who lived in it. It had been built for a scholar with a small body and a smaller ambition, and it held a wheeled invalid chair like a pistol held in a lady's purse, uneasily ready to snag. The grate was cold. A decanter stood half full on the writing desk. The curtains were half drawn, and the light came in grey and strained, as if embarrassed to be there at all. In the chair by the unlit fire sat the Duke. He was 27 years of age, and he looked, in that light, very much older and very much younger at once. His hair was the precise pale gold of her own, thicker than hers, cut harshly to his collar by someone who did not mean well by him, and it fell across a broad forehead that bore one thin white scar just above the right eyebrow. His eyes, when they lifted at her step, were a hard, storm-coloured grey-blue, and they were the first part of him that reminded her he had once been a cavalry officer. His shoulders were very wide under his black coat. His hands were powerful. She could see the cord in his wrist where it lay across the arm of the chair. A dark travelling rug covered his knees and fell over the place where his boots ought to have moved, and did not. He looked at her a long moment. Then he reached down to the writing table beside him, picked up a heavy brass paperweight the size of a small pear, and threw it straight at her head. Charlotte caught it. It slapped into her palm with force enough to numb her fingers to the wrist, and she closed her hand around it and held it, and did not move her feet. Her pale gold hair, loosened by the walk, had fallen against her cheek. She did not reach up to tuck it back. Her eyes were on his eyes. A small muscle moved in his jaw. "Get out," he said. His voice was low and very even. He had the kind of voice that had given orders on a parade ground. "Whoever you are, get out of my house." "I am Miss Charlotte Merritt," she said. "Mrs. Halvard has engaged me. I shall be your maid of the upper chambers and of this room." "You will not." "I will, Your Grace. I do not speak to maids." "I am not asking you to speak to me." She set the brass paperweight down on the writing desk, quietly, with the exact care of a woman returning a borrowed thing. "I am telling you I will lay your fire and draw your curtains and bring your tea, because this room is cold and full of brandy fumes and smells, pardon me, like a man who has given up. And I do not propose to work in a room that smells of a man who has given up." She heard him draw breath to speak. She did not let him. "I am not afraid of a man in a chair," she said, and her voice was steady, and it was also quite kind. "I am afraid of a man who uses the chair as a shield against every woman kind enough to enter this room. That is a different thing, and that I will not tolerate, not from your grace, nor from any man living. Do we understand each other?" The fire she had not yet built crackled in her imagining. In the actual room, there was only his breathing, and her breathing, and the tick of a standing clock that had been wound by someone who cared about it once. She did not wait for his answer. She went to the grate and knelt in her travelling dress. She would regret the dress later, and did not care at present. And she began to lay the fire. She laid it well. She had laid fires in her father's rectory from the age of 7, because there had never been more than one maid-of-all-work, and there had frequently been no maid at all. And her father had been the sort of man who believed God provided warmth in the same way he provided salvation, which is to say remotely, and with a certain inconvenience. She laid the kindling in a cross and banked the coals behind it, and when she held a taper to the paper and the flame went up clean and orange, the Duke drew breath, as though he had not seen a fire lit by a woman in a long time. She did not look up. When the fire was crackling, she stood and brushed her hands on her apron, which she had tied under her cloak as soon as she had set down her trunk in the hall. She went to the window and put her hand to the curtain. She did not open it all the way. She opened it to the measure of a man who has not wanted much light in his life lately, and may want a little. Then she turned round. "I shall fetch your tea," she said. "How do you take it?" He was looking at her as though she were a thing he had not met before, and did not quite know how to place. "I do not take tea," he said at last, and his voice had a fine thread of something in it that had not been there a moment before. Not warmth, not yet, but the dry and almost amused exhaustion of a man who has just been outflanked on ground he thought he owned. "Then you shall begin today," she said, and she went out of the room to fetch it. That was the first morning. They were not all like that. In the days that followed, she came to know the order of the Duke's small kingdom. How Mrs. Halvard would not enter the west corridor before 10. How Davis the groom came in twice a day to lift his master to a second chair for the washing and dressing. How the cook, Mrs. Pritchard, made the same beef broth every midday as if she were defending a siege with it. Charlotte did not try to change these arrangements. She added to them. Tea at 7:30, a second cup at 11, with a plate of thin bread and butter that he did not eat the first morning, nor the second, but did eat on the 5th, without comment. The fire lit at 6, banked at 10, rekindled at 3. The curtains opened by a careful inch each day, so that by the end of the first week, the pale spring light came into the morning room in a long, clean bar across the carpet, and he did not flinch from it. And she read to him. He had said the second day, when she carried a volume of Byron in under her arm, she had found the slim, crimson-bound book on a lower shelf in the library, with the leaves uncut. Not that one. Not in this house. Why not that one? He did not answer. His mouth tightened. His hand went flat against the arm of his chair, and did not lift. She put Byron down. She did not press. She went back to the library, and she took instead a heavier book in calf, and she came back and sat herself on the small, hard chair Davis had put out for her by the window, and she opened it, and said, "Then, Tacitus, your grace, the annals, if you can bear me." "Begin," he said. She read him Tacitus for an hour, and you listened. He listened with his head against the back of the chair and his eyes closed, and once his breathing steadied into what she might have called rest, if she had not known he did not sleep in the day. When she stopped at the end of the book, she looked up, and his eyes were open and on her, and there was a clarity in them that had not been there when she had come in. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. By the 4th day, she knew that he had been at Waterloo, because Davis told her. By the 5th, she knew that it had been a shell burst that had taken his legs' use. Not the legs themselves. They were there still, whole and wasted, and he would not suffer any woman save the physician to see them. By the 6th, she knew that he could not bear pity, and that he would rather be hated than soft-handled, and that he had not been addressed with a firm voice by any woman in the better part of a year. She noticed, on the mantelpiece, a small carved wooden horse. It was no taller than her thumb. The wood was a pale ash, polished to a gloss by much handling. Its head was bent as though it were drinking from a trough that had not been carved in. A child had made it, or a young thing with a clever knife. The legs were a little uneven, and the mane was scored in with a care that had cost time. It sat on the mantel between a brass clock and the cracked blue Chinese bowl, and the Duke never mentioned it, and Charlotte did not ask. On the 7th morning, a letter came in on the salver. She set it by his tea. The seal was heavy wax, a crest of some kind she did not recognize, and a clean copperplate hand on the outside had written, "His Grace, the Duke of Ravensmere, Private." The letter carried, faintly, the smell of bergamot. She set it down and turned to take his teacup. He looked at the letter. He did not open it. He reached out his long, strong hand, picked it up between 2 fingers, and dropped it into the fire, where it caught along one edge, and then consumed itself in a flare of green wax and black paper, and a quick white ash. "If another comes," he said without looking at her, "do the same." "Yes, Your Grace." "You are not curious, Miss Merritt?" "I am curious about many things, Your Grace." She poured his tea. "I do not put my curiosity ahead of my duties. It makes for a poor housekeeper." He gave a small sound that might, in another man, have been a laugh. "You are not a housekeeper." "No," she said. "I am a maid. For the present." She said that on a Tuesday. On the following Sunday night, the matter of his chair and the gallery stairs put an end to the present, and started something different. It was past midnight, and the house was asleep. Charlotte had gone down to the kitchen for a pitcher of water, because the pitcher in her room had frozen a skin of cold across its surface, and she had woken thirsty and cross. She was coming back along the long gallery on the first floor with her candle in her hand when she heard the crash. And it was a heavy, wooden, clattering crash, and it was followed by a man's voice. Not a shout, a word under breath, low and wrenched. And then a silence that was worse than the crash. She ran. She held the candle high and she ran. The long gallery at Ravensmere ran the whole length of the first floor, ending in a short flight of 4 broad stone steps that went down into the portrait hall. It was those steps that she had warned Mrs. Halvard about on her first morning. It was those steps that now held the wheeled chair of the Duke of Ravensmere on its side, one wheel still turning, and the Duke himself sprawled full length on the cold flagstones below, one arm flung out, and his hair across his face, and his cheek against the stone.
Your Grace.
She put the candle down on the step and went to him. She did not ask whether he could move. She already knew. She knelt by him and put her hand very gently under the back of his head. It was warm, which was the first good news. He was conscious. His breath was rough but even. The travelling rug had slid half off him, and she pulled it back into place over his legs before anything else, because she had learned in 7 days that his dignity was a thing he would defend with the last of his breath. "Miss Merritt," he said into the stone, without opening his eyes. "I am here. Can you tell me where it hurts?" "My shoulder. My head. Not—" He caught himself. "Not what you think." "I did not think anything, Your Grace. I'm going for Davis." "No." "Your Grace." His hand came up and caught her wrist. It was the first time he had touched her. His grip was exactly as strong as she had guessed it would be, and it held her the way a drowning man holds a rope, without apology, without softness, simply because he meant to live. "Do not," he said. "Do not call. I will not be found on the floor by half the house." "Then you shall be found on the floor by Davis and me, and no one else. And Davis will hold his tongue because he loves you." She put her other hand over his, steady and firm, and she did not pull her wrist away. "Your Grace, I cannot lift you alone. I do not pretend. Davis can. He will say nothing, I give you my word on that. And I will stay here with you until he comes." He looked at her then. His eyes in the candlelight were very dark. After a long moment he nodded, once. She went as far as the bell pull at the end of the gallery. Davis answered a pull after midnight, Mrs. Halvard had told her, and no one else. And then she came back to him, and she sat on the step above where he lay, and she put her hand on his shoulder where she could feel the tremor of pain running under the cloth of his coat. He drifted. He did not lose himself wholly. He did not faint. But the pain and the cold stone and the hour wore at him, and his breathing grew heavy, and his head turned against the stone. And once, with her hand on his shoulder and her candle guttering on the step, he spoke a name out of the grey country between waking and sleep. "Edward," he said. Charlotte's hand closed on his shoulder and did not move. "Edward Merritt," he said, and there was no anger in it. There was something more complicated than anger, something older. "Edward, I would have." And then Davis was on the back stairs with a lantern, and the groom's broad shoulders filled the doorway, and there was no more to be said. They got him back to his rooms between them, Davis taking the greater part of the weight, and Charlotte steadying the rug and the head and the ruined chair behind. When he was in his own bed at last, pale and quiet, his eyes closed, Davis looked across at her. "He won't thank you for this, miss," Davis said. "He does not need to thank me." "He spoke a name down there, miss." Davis was an older man, with a grey moustache and a pair of very shrewd brown eyes. He had known the Duke from boyhood. "Did he?" "He said nothing I understood," Charlotte said smoothly. And she looked at Davis, and he looked at her. And the thing that passed between them was not a lie, so much as a shared decision. Davis nodded. He went away. Charlotte sat by the Duke's chair all night. He woke at dawn. The east window was grey. She was in the hard chair by the fire, her pale gold hair a little loose at the temples, where she had dozed against her hand, and her grey travelling dress, for she had not gone back to her own rooms to change, still dusted with the grit of the gallery floor. When his eyes opened, they found her at once. "You are still here," he said. "I am still here." "Davis." "Davis will say nothing. I gave you my word." You have not slept. I have slept a little, Your Grace. He watched her. The pain had drawn lines at the corner of his mouth she had not seen before, and the wheat gold of his hair was dark with sweat at the brow. She stood up. She brought him water in a glass. She held it to his lips. He drank. He did not meet her eyes as he drank. She saw the effort that took him, and she said nothing of it. Miss Merritt. Your Grace. I was not lucid last night. Did I? You said very little. You spoke once of pain, once of the cold stone. That was all. His grey-blue eyes flicked up to her at that, sharp, and she kept her face still. She had not decided to lie. She had decided not to ask. There was a difference, and the difference was all she had. Drink the water, she said. He drank. She did not ask him the name for 3 more days. On the 4th day, a grey, wet morning with the rain coming in long diagonals across the park, she brought in his tea as she always did, and she set it at his elbow, and she stood with her hands folded in front of her apron and said, quite calmly, Your Grace, may I ask you a question? Yes. Who was Edward Merritt? He set his cup down very carefully. Not a drop spilled. A man who had been a cavalry officer at Waterloo did not spill tea. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something cross his face that she could not read. A weariness, and under them both, a certain bleak and grinding honesty. Why do you ask, Miss Merritt? I heard the name. I am asking. He was silent. Then he said, without taking his eyes off her face, Edward Merritt was a lieutenant in my regiment. At Quatre Bras, on the evening of the 16th of June, 1815, he left the line with 3 men under him when he had been ordered to hold. When the French came through the gap he had left, I lost a great many men. I myself was struck down. My legs, as you see. He opened his hand flat against the arm of his chair. He closed it. Edward Merritt was listed as missing, presumed deserted. He did not come home. The Merritt family was of the middling sort, a rectory in Hertfordshire, I believe. There was a sister, but she did not write to me, and I did not write to her, because... His mouth tightened. Because what was there to say? Charlotte did not move. Her hands were still folded in front of her apron. The rain came against the window. The carved wooden horse on the mantel kept its patient head bent, drinking from nothing. Your Grace, she said, and her voice had gone very level, very careful. Edward Merritt was my brother. He did not move. He did not speak. A log settled in the grate with a soft collapse. Miss Merritt, he said at last. I did not take this place by accident, Your Grace. The agency sent me, that is true. But I came to this house because I have had in my keeping for 11 years a letter my brother wrote to me 3 weeks before Waterloo. I have read that letter every week of the 11 years. I came because my brother was not a coward, and the man whose name is on the record as his commanding officer is you. I would ask you to hear me. She waited. He said nothing. His face had gone the grey of old linen. She went to the writing desk. She opened the small reticule she had laid on it that morning, because she had known that morning when she lifted the kettle, that today she would ask the question. She drew out a folded packet of papers, tied with a green ribbon, and she set them on his knee. Read them, she said. You do not need to believe me. Read them, and then we will speak. He looked down at the papers. He did not touch them at once. Then he untied the ribbon with fingers that were very steady, because a man does not fail at a small task when a great one is in the room. She watched him read. She had known her brother's hands since she was 9 and he was 11. Edward had written to her every month from the continent. The packet she had given the Duke was the last of those letters, the one written in a crossroads inn near Mons on the evening of the 25th of May, 1815, and it spoke of a man, a cousin of the Colonel's, very smooth, very smiling, a little too well dressed, who had, that afternoon, offered Edward a sum of 100 guineas in a private room at the inn to fail of his duty on the next fighting day. To leave a certain part of the line in the way of accident, you understand me, Lottie? I cannot write it plainer. And Edward had refused, and had said in the letter that he would report the matter to the colonel on the morning the regiment came up to the line, because he did not trust a letter not to be opened on the road. The Duke read the letter through. He read it again. When he looked up, his face was not grey any longer. It was white, the white of a man who had had a window opened in his chest, and cold air had come in. "Devereux," he said.
What? Sir Philip Devereux. He's my cousin. He was at that inn.
I did not know he had been at that inn. His hand, which had been steady, closed slowly around the edge of the letter. "Miss Merritt, I have not read this letter before." "I know. I was told Edward Merritt had been seen riding north from the line with 3 men behind him. I was told it by Philip. I was told it on the morning of the 18th, as I was being lifted into the surgeon's cart. I was half out of my senses. I took the account as given." "Yes, Your Grace." "Your brother—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Your brother wrote a second letter, perhaps, to the colonel, before the morning he meant to bring the matter up." "He wrote it," Charlotte said. "I believe he did. I do not have it. I believe it was intercepted." "I believe it too." He was looking at her. She saw Osi for the first time since she had walked into that morning room with the brass paperweight in her hand, as a clean fire in his eyes that had nothing to do with anger. "Miss Merritt, I owe your brother—" He did not finish. "Will you help me?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Not as a maid." "No, Your Grace." "As—" He caught her eye. He did not finish this sentence either. He said instead, quite simply, "Sit down. There is work to do." She sat down. They worked for 3 days on the floor of the morning room. She fetched down boxes from the upper shelves of the library, the letter boxes of the last 2 years that he had not cared to open, and she laid their contents in rows on the carpet. He read. She read. They found a solicitor's letter from a firm in Lincoln's Inn, a letter Philip had acknowledged and told the Duke to ignore. They found a banker's note of a loan drawn in Theo's name that Theo had not drawn, signed with a hand that was almost, but not quite, his. They found the correspondence with the magistrate at Langham, Sir Barnaby Crewe, in which Philip had written, in a hand so courteous it was almost tender, of his distress and his dear cousin's mental decline, of the Duke's paranoia, of his refusal to see visitors, of the shocking fact that the Duke would see no woman but a maid of the agency. Charlotte held that last letter a long moment. "He has been writing about you," she said, "for months." "He has been writing about me," Theo said very quietly, "for a year. He intends to have you declared of unsound mind. He intends to inherit." They sat on the carpet, the two of them, with the papers laid out between them like the cards of a game neither of them had asked to play. The rain had stopped. The fire had burned low. Charlotte had taken off her apron 2 hours ago, because there was nothing a clean apron could do for this work, and her pale gold hair was loosening out of its pins, and Theo, in his chair drawn close to the hearthrug, had his hand flat against the arm of his chair and his jaw set, and the long white scar above his eyebrow stood out against the pallor of his forehead, like a rule line on a page. "There is more," Charlotte said. She lifted a piece of stiff cream card from the pile. "This came yesterday. I did not bring it to you because I was considering. Lady Hawthorne is giving a ball in the Hawthorne Gallery in 11 days' time. She has invited you, and your cousin. By the note at the corner," she turned the card to the firelight, "Sir Barnaby Crewe is to be present." 11 days, Theo said. 11 days. He intends to raise it there, in public, before a magistrate, before a county. Yes. Theo did not swear because he was a man who had learned during a long year in a chair, but cursing made nothing more possible. He said instead, "Then we have 11 days to undo a year." 10, said Charlotte, because this one is nearly gone. He laughed. It was short and it was dry, and it was the first laugh she had heard out of him, and the sound of it lifted in the room like a startled bird. 2 mornings later, she wheeled him out of the morning room for the first time since she had come to the house. She did it deliberately. She did it because she had sat by his elbow on the floor and read through the correspondence and watched him piece a year of betrayal together. And she had seen that a man who does not leave a room for a season starts to become the room, and she would not have him be the room any longer. She wheeled him down the west corridor and out into the long gallery on the first floor. The long gallery at Ravensmere was a grand, long, well-lit room, with tall windows on one side and a run of portraits on the other, and it ended at the short flight of stone steps that went down into the portrait hall. It was the gallery whose end had thrown him the night of the fall. She had picked it for that reason. Halfway down the gallery hung a great Venetian looking-glass in a gilt frame. The Duke's mother had bought it in Venice on her wedding journey, Mrs. Halvard had told her, and it had hung there since the Duke was a small boy. Charlotte wheeled him to face it, and she stopped the chair. She stepped back. He looked into the glass. She saw him look. She had wondered, many times in the past fortnight, what he saw when he caught sight of himself in a small shaving mirror or the brass back of a snuffer, and whether he saw the same man she saw. Now, with the whole length of him given back to him in a plate of clear, polished glass, she had her answer. His face did not change, but she saw his hand go tight on the arm of the chair, and she saw his shoulders draw back as a man draws his shoulders back against a cold wind. He did not recognize himself. She understood that without his saying it. He had not looked at himself, properly, for the better part of a year. He had looked, perhaps, at half of himself, the half that a man shaves, and never at the whole. The man in the glass had a harder line to the jaw than the man who had gone to Waterloo. The man in the glass had a set to the mouth that had not belonged to the cavalry officer of 1815. The man in the glass was not the man his cousin Philip had known. He was also not the man any mirror in this house had known before. Charlotte went and stood behind the chair. She was careful. She put her hand lightly on his shoulder. She felt the wool of his coat under her palm, warm, with the fine tremor of held breath beneath it. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, without softness, the way one speaks a true thing to a man who has been told many false ones, "You are still yourself, Your Grace." He looked, not at the glass, not any longer. In the glass, she saw his eyes shift. She saw them find, not his own face, but hers, her pale gold hair bright above the dark of his coat, her grey eyes meeting his grey-blue ones through the silvered depth of the looking-glass. It was like looking at two people standing side by side, and it was the first time since she had come to Ravensmere that they had stood side by side, and it was the first time he had seen them that way. He did not look away, neither did she. For a long moment, there was only the ticking of the gallery clock, and the faint smell of bergamot from the cuff of his coat, and the cool place where her hand lay on his shoulder. Then his hand came up, slowly, and covered hers. "Miss Merritt," he said. "Your Grace." "I should not—" He stopped. He had never been a man for sentences that started with, "I should not." He had not had the habit. He left it unfinished. She did not mind it unfinished. His thumb moved, once, very slightly against her knuckle. She took her hand away before either of them had time to decide what to do next. She wheeled him on down the gallery. She did not wheel him to the steps. She turned him before the steps and took him back, and she went more slowly on the way back, because they had something between them now, and she did not wish to jolt it. The chimney stack came down 3 nights later. The weather had been changing for a day. The wind had got up at dusk, and by 10 it was battering the west front of the house, and by midnight the gales were driving the rain flat against the library windows. Theo had asked Charlotte to read to him in the library that evening, because the morning room had grown too small for him, he said, and the library had the better light. She had not pointed out that the light was 4 candles either way. She had only agreed. She had been reading Tacitus again. The book was 2/3 through now, and he did not like her to begin another until it was done, when the wind rose to a thin, shrieking note, and she put down the book and listened. "It is only the wind," he said. "It is not only the wind." She stood up. She moved towards him, because the chair was set with its back to the great window above the library desk, and there were chimneys above the library roof, and a sound had come that she did not like. It was a long, low, grinding sound, the sound of old mortar giving up at last, and it came from directly above them, and in the same breath, the whole window behind Theo filled with a grey, tumbling weight. And then the window was not there any longer, and the noise was everywhere. She did the only thing she had the thought to do. She threw herself across the chair and got her body between his head and the falling of the glass and the stones. His arms came up around her waist. She felt them go around her with a soldier's speed, and he pulled her down hard against him, and his wide hand closed flat between her shoulder blades, and the two of them went down into each other as tiles and wood and slate and masonry came down around them. She did not shut her eyes. She was looking at his throat, and the place where his collar met his skin, and she could smell the bergamot of him under the smell of the cold rain and wet plaster and old brick, and his jaw was against her temple, and his breath was warm against her hair, and the world was coming down behind her, and under all of it, she felt his arms holding her, as though he had held something infinitely precious a moment before it was taken away, once in his life, and he would not let it happen twice. A last slate came down on the floor, a yard from the chair. The wind went through the broken window in a long, low moan. Glass settled. It was over. Neither of them moved. She could not, at once, because he would not let her. His hand was still flat between her shoulder blades, and his other arm still round her waist, and he was not holding her loosely. She did not want to, because she had not stood so near to another human being since her mother had held her at the door of the rectory the day she left for her first place. His heart was a hard, quick beat against the cloth of his shirt, and she could feel her own answering it. His breath was at her ear. He did not speak. She drew back, slowly, just enough to see his face. His eyes were closed. She saw in the candlelight that had not gone out the white tension at the corner of his mouth. She lifted her hand, the one that was free, and brushed, very gently, a streak of plaster dust from his hair. His eyes opened. They were very dark. "Miss Merritt," he said, and his voice was not level at all now. "I am not hurt," she said. "No." "Your Grace." "No." They did not move for another moment. Then Davis's voice was at the library door. "Your Grace! Your Grace, are you—" And Charlotte stood up out of the chair smoothly, and stepped back, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and the moment was gone into the public air, where it could not be measured. Sir Philip Devereux arrived at Ravensmere, unannounced, 3 afternoons later. Charlotte was on the staircase with a pile of linen when his carriage came up the drive. She knew at once that it was his carriage, because it was a smart, dark green thing with silver harness, and because she had been watching for a smart, dark green thing with silver harness for a week. She set the linen down. She went at once to the morning room. "Sir Philip," she said, without preamble. Theo, at the fire, lifted his head. "On the drive," she said. "In a green carriage. He will be at the door in 3 minutes." "Go," said Theo. "Back of the house, through the kitchen corridor, out of sight. Come back in your apron and your cap and do not meet his eyes." She nodded once. She was not offended. She understood the game. She went. When she came back into the morning room 10 minutes later with the tea tray, her apron crisp, her cap starched, her pale gold hair drawn tight and severe under the lace, Sir Philip Devereux was seated by the fire in the visitor's chair, with his long legs crossed, and a glass of sherry in his hand, and a smile that would have done honor to a portrait by Lawrence. He was beautiful. She had to grant him that at once. He was 29, dark-haired. The contrast to the two blonde heads in the room was so marked that Charlotte felt it like a change of music. With a fine, straight nose, and lashes too long for his eyes, and a mouth with a certain sweet curl at the corner. He wore a rose-pink waistcoat of very fine silk under a dark coat, and the smell of bergamot and clove cologne came off him in a warm wave as he turned towards the opening door. His eyes found Charlotte. They travelled her face in a way that a well-bred man's eyes should not. "And who," he said, "is this?" "The new maid," said Theo. "Miss Merritt. She laid the fire, as you see. She is remarkably competent for a woman of the agency." Sir Philip smiled. He smiled at Charlotte. She looked at the carpet, an act of discipline, not of fear. "Miss Merritt," he said. "Charming. I do hope my cousin is not hard on you. He has a reputation." He said the word reputation like a man who had laid it there himself and was admiring his work. "I'm glad to see a steady hand in this room at last." "Sir Philip is too kind," Charlotte said to the carpet. "You may go, Miss Merritt," Theo said quietly. She poured the tea. She set it at his elbow. She took the tray out of the room. At the door, she lifted her eyes, only once and only for a moment, and met Sir Philip's. He was still smiling. He held her eyes a half-second too long. She dropped her own and went out. From the window of the housekeeper's pantry, she watched his carriage go down the drive an hour later. His valet, a sharp-faced man in a dark coat, carried a locked dispatch case across the gravel and set it into the carriage with both hands. The case was of black leather, bound with 3 brass bands, and Charlotte watched the way the valet set it down, carefully, squarely, and she knew. She went to Theo. "He carries a case," she said. "His valet set it into the carriage as though there were glass inside. He has gone home for the night. The ball is tomorrow. He will return in the morning from his own house. That case is not here, but the case is everywhere he is. Your Grace, I can be at Devereux Park before midnight and back before dawn." Theo's hand closed on the arm of his chair. "No, Your Grace, I will not. Your Grace, listen to me. Tomorrow he stands up in Lady Hawthorne's gallery and asks Sir Barnaby Crewe to examine you for unsound mind in front of 200 witnesses. The letters we have are good. They are not enough. The one thing that would be enough is what is inside that case. I have seen the way his valet carried it. He does not carry a hatbox that way. I am a small thing, Your Grace. I am a small, plain, grey-dressed thing that a house full of servants will not notice. I am going. Do not ask me not to go." He was silent. His grey-blue eyes went over her face. He did not argue. "Davis," he said at last. "Davis will drive you. Davis will wait at the turning. If you are not back at the turning by 4 o'clock of the morning, Davis will come for you, and he will bring 3 men." "Agreed." Charlotte. It was the first time he had used her name. It stopped her where she stood. "Your Grace, if you are caught, I shall not be caught." She went. She was not caught. Devereux Park was a smaller house than Ravensmere, much smaller, with a carelessly kept staff and a front door that a maid who had once served in a seaside inn could open with a bent hairpin in under a minute. The dispatch case was in the book room. It was locked. She did not bother with the lock. She took the whole case. It was heavy, but she was a tall woman of 26 who had been carrying buckets since she was 7. She was out and in the waiting cart with Davis within the quarter hour, and by 3 in the morning she was back on the gravel drive of Ravensmere, with the rain running off her bonnet, and the dispatch case held to her chest like a foundling. Theo was still in the library. The fire had burned low. He had not gone to bed. She came into the library wet to the shoulders. She set the dispatch case on his lap. Then she turned to go. There was still her own hair to dry and her gown to change before anyone of the house was up. And as she turned, his hand closed round her wrist. He did not pull hard. He pulled steady. He pulled her to the arm of his chair, and she went to it because she could no more have resisted it than a compass needle resists its true pole. And she knelt on the hearthrug beside him with the rain still cold in her hair, and he looked into her face for a long moment. "I do not know," he said, "what I would have—" He stopped. He did not finish. He put his hand, quite gently, under her chin, and he tipped her face up, and he kissed her. He kissed her once, carefully, the way a man kisses the first page of a letter he has been waiting for a long time. Then he did not kiss her carefully. His hand went into the wet, pale gold of her hair, and he kissed her as if he were, at last, finding something he had not expected to find in this house, or in this life. And she kissed him back, because her own hands had found his face of their own accord, and she could not have drawn them away. When he drew his mouth an inch from hers, he said, against her mouth, "Stay." She stayed. They opened the dispatch case together at dawn. Inside it, they found the copy of the forged desertion letter, in Philip's hand, not quite Edward's. They found a ledger in which sums had been entered against the names of 4 magistrates of the county. They found notes in Philip's round copperplate to each of those magistrates, setting out, in the easy voice of a man writing to his club, a case that his cousin was no longer of sound mind. And they found, folded at the bottom, the genuine commendation that Edward's colonel had written for Lieutenant Edward Merritt 3 days before Quatre Blas, praising his coolness, his fidelity to orders, his quiet, steady courage under fire. Edward's commanding officer had sent it up to the Duke. Philip had intercepted it, and kept it, and no doubt meant, in time, to burn it. Charlotte laid her hand flat on the commendation. "There," she said. The Hawthorne Ball ran at its height by 10 o'clock. The long gallery of Hawthorne House, twice the length of Ravensmere's own, was a long, hot, bright pour of candlelight and chandeliers and silk and silver and music. Charlotte stood at the head of it, at the top of the staircase, in an ice-blue silk gown Theo had insisted on. He had had it made, in a great rush of a week, by a mantua maker in York. He had not asked her, he had simply had it done. The sleeves were short, the bodice was square, the waist was high. Her pale gold hair was loose at her shoulders for the first time in her grown life, and a thin silver circlet, her grandmother's, which she had not worn since the burial of her mother, held it at her brow. She saw Theo below her, at the head of the gallery, in his chair. Davis had brought him. He was in a dark coat and a charcoal waistcoat, and his pale gold hair had been cut properly at last. She had cut it herself that morning, with a pair of scissors in her steady hand, with him sitting in his chair and looking steadily up at her and saying almost nothing. And he looked, she thought, not like a man in a chair. He looked like a man in a chair who had decided that the chair was a fact of his body and not a fact of his soul. Sir Philip arrived at 10:15. He came up the gallery in a rose-pink coat and a cream waistcoat that showed a watch chain of thin gold. And behind him came Sir Barnaby Crewe, magistrate of Langham, a heavy, grey man of 70, with a grave, kind face, and the eyes of a man who had sat on the bench through 40 assizes. The music stopped by the hand of Lady Hawthorne, who had been warned. Sir Philip bowed to the room. He bowed to his cousin. He smiled the smile that had been painting his way through the county for a year. "My dear friends," he began, "it is with great regret—" "Sir Philip," said Charlotte. Her voice cut across the gallery like a struck bell. Every head in the room turned to her. She came down the staircase, not quickly, but not slowly, and her ice-blue silk moved about her, and her pale gold hair, loose and bright, caught the candlelight. "I have something," she said, "to lay before Sir Barnaby Crewe." Sir Philip's face did not change. She saw it. She saw the small, cold tightening of the muscle by his jaw that meant he had not expected her. "Miss," he said. "Miss Charlotte Merritt," she said, "of Hertfordshire." "Yes," Sir Philip, you have met me before. I came up by the morning coach. Sir Barnaby, may I trouble you?" Sir Barnaby looked at her. He looked at Philip. He came forward one slow, careful step, and he said, "Young lady, proceed." She proceeded. She did it calmly, and she did it well. She laid on a small marble-topped table, which a Hawthorne footman brought forward as she asked for it, the ledger of sums paid to magistrates, the forged desertion letter in Philip's hand, the letters of his forced concern to Sir Barnaby himself, the genuine commendation of Lieutenant Edward Merritt, signed by his colonel, and, at the last, a sworn written statement from Davis the groom, testifying that he had been with the Duke hourly for the last year, and that he could swear on his immortal part to the Duke's entire soundness of mind. Sir Barnaby read. He was a reader, Sir Barnaby. He had read many things from many hands in his long life. He read everything. The room was silent behind him. Lady Hawthorne's 200 guests stood in a great, hushed ring about the table. Somewhere a glass clinked once against a tray, and a footman, very gently, shushed the clink. When Sir Barnaby had read the last paper, he set it down. He looked up. He looked at Sir Philip Devereux. "Sir Philip," he said, and his voice, though quiet, carried. "You will give me the honour of your company in the anteroom. At once." He raised his hand. Two of Lady Hawthorne's own men, large men, footmen, but not only footmen, stepped out from the wall of the gallery where they had been standing discreetly. "You will go with these gentlemen. You will not leave this house. We have considerable business to conduct." Sir Philip opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He was led away in full view of 200 guests. The rose pink of his coat made a bright, retreating mark across the gallery. The double doors shut behind him. A great collective breath went out of the room. Sir Barnaby turned to Theo. "Your Grace," he said, "I owe you, I believe, an apology that 10 years will not repair. I shall try to repair it in what years remain to me." Theo inclined his head. Then Sir Barnaby turned, old man, good man, to Charlotte. "Miss Merritt," he said, "I would be a fool if I did not say to you, here and now, that I have not seen a lady of 25 years speak a truer suit of evidence in my whole professional life. You are a credit to your brother." Charlotte did not, at that, weep. She had not let herself weep for her brother for 11 years, and she did not propose to begin in a public gallery. She inclined her head to Sir Barnaby. She did not trust her voice. Theo's hand behind her found her hand. He did not lift it. He did not show it. But his fingers wove into hers at her side, and she felt them, steady and warm, and that was enough to hold her. She did not play the hero any more that night. Lady Hawthorne, who was a practical woman, gave a signal, and the music began again, and a polonaise, and the 200 guests, after a moment, pretended with great English skill that they had not all just seen what they had all just seen. Charlotte danced with no one. She stood by Theo's chair. They went home in his carriage at 2 in the morning. Ravensmere was dark, but for a single lamp in the long gallery. Davis had left the lamp for them. Davis understood a great many things that he had never been told. Theo had Davis leave them at the head of the gallery, and then Davis, wise old man, withdrew. Charlotte wheeled Theo's chair herself down the gallery to the looking-glass where, a fortnight before, he had seen his own face and hers beside it for the first time. They looked into it now. The candlelight was low. Her ice-blue silk was the color of deep water. His dark coat was the color of a good night's sky. Their two pale gold heads together in the glass were bright as twin wheat sheaves in a harvested field. He looked, not at himself. He looked at her. "Charlotte." "Theo," he said, steadily, as if he had been waiting a long time to say it. "I have loved you since you walked into my morning room with the brass paperweight in your hand." She laughed. A small laugh, a startled laugh, a laugh with tears in it, and she bent down to him, there in front of the looking-glass where a duke and his maid stood side by side, and she said, against his hair, I have loved you since you threw it. Summer came slowly to Ravensmere. By the end of May, the park was cuckoo loud. By the beginning of June, the rose walk below the south terrace had opened a long pale froth of bloom, and the house, which had in April been a cold grey siege, had come into the first warmth of a new summer in its life. The shutters of the west wing were opened at last. The great Venetian glass in the gallery was dusted gently by Mrs. Halvard's own hand, and hung again. The morning room, which had been the Duke's dark fortress for a year, had its furniture changed round and its carpet taken up, and an east window, long shuttered, was opened to the morning. Charlotte had found, in York, a craftsman, a small, careful man with a white beard and hands that knew wood the way other men knew horses. He had made a new chair for Theo. It was lighter than the old one, and lower, and the wheels were laced with leather so that they did not clatter on the boards of the long gallery, and the arms of it were so fashioned that a cane, a stout, polished ash cane, would fit along the left side and be ready to hand. Theo had not asked for the cane. Charlotte had asked for it, on her own head, and the craftsman had made it. On the 5th day of June, in the long gallery, under her quiet eye, Theo put his hands on the arms of the new chair, set his teeth, and stood for the first time in 16 months. He stood for 6 seconds. He sat down again. She did not clap. She did not weep. She took his hand, because he had asked her, without asking her, for her hand. She held it. Again, he said. Tomorrow again. Tonight. Tomorrow. You have carried yourself far enough for one day, Your Grace. Charlotte. Tomorrow. On the 18th of June, a date neither of them mentioned aloud, and both noted privately, he stood for 30 seconds. On the 8th of July, he walked 5 paces, with his cane, from the chair to the window. On the 1st day of August, he came down the long gallery stairs on his own legs, with the cane, with her hand at his elbow, not because he needed it, but because she liked it there. They were married at St. Aidan's, the small village church beyond the park, on the morning of the 14th of August. The whole village came. Mrs. Halvard was at the door of the church in a new black bonnet and a trembling mouth. Davis had scrubbed his hands 3 times and was still worrying about his hands. Charlotte wore pale apricot silk, one striking-coloured dress once, and her pale gold hair was bound up simply under a veil of her mother's, and Theo, in charcoal, stood at the altar with his cane in his left hand and his right out for her. He did not sit. She came up the aisle to him. She did not need to rush. He was not leaving. Afterwards, in the long gallery of Ravensmere, where a great, quiet wedding breakfast had been laid, and where the Venetian glass once again took their 2 pale gold heads in side by side, Mrs. Halvard was heard to tell a startled new kitchen girl, who had arrived that week from the village, and did not yet know where the salt was kept. There were 100 maids in this house in 6 months, my dear, and 99 of them ran. Only 1 stayed. Oh, said the kitchen girl, do you see her? Yes, Mrs. Halvard. The lady in apricot. That is the Duchess of Ravensmere. You will do well to remember it. Late that evening, when the guests had gone, and the long gallery was quiet, and Davis had gone home, and the moon had come up over the park, Theo sat in his chair. He still used the chair at evening because he was not a foolish man, and his legs were still his legs, beside the fire in the library. Charlotte sat on the hearthrug beside him in her apricot silk, leaning her shoulder against his knee, with a calf-bound book in her lap. She was reading Tacitus aloud. On the mantel above them, between the brass clock and the cracked blue Chinese bowl, stood the small carved wooden horse, its head bent to a water it had not yet drunk. On the shelf at Theo's elbow lay, at last, the crimson-bound Byron, its leaves no longer uncut. Somewhere from his coat, hanging on a chair at the back of the room, the faintest ghost of bergamot came off the cuff. His hand lay across the arm of the chair. Her hand lay in it. The fire was lit. It had been lit by her earlier that evening, without any particular ceremony, the way a woman who has been laying fires in this room for half a year lays a fire in a room she has come to know. She had laid it in a cross, and banked the coals behind, and touched a taper to it, and the flame had gone up clean and orange, and the room, which had been cold once, was not cold at all. She read, and he listened, and she turned the page.